Hello and welcome to the Fall 2020 HCR Multifamily Finance 9% RFP webinar. My name is Brett Hebner, Vice President of Multifamily Finance. We're pleased to announce the release of this RFP and to be making these resources available to develop and preserve affordable housing, as well as advance the state's housing goals. There will be several presenters today other than myself, including Darren Scott, Upstate East Development Director, Lenny Skrill, Upstate West Development Director, and introducing Ayanna Weiner, our new Downstate Development Director. Also, Christy Witcher, Senior Architect with the Design, Construction, and Environmental Unit, and Heather Spitzberg, Director of the Environmental Unit. The intent of this presentation is to provide information and guidance related to the RFP for applicants seeking 9% low-income housing tax credits, state low-income housing tax credits, or any of the various subsidy sources that will be described herein. A couple of housekeeping items. First, the webinar is intended to provide an overview of the RFP process and highlight what has changed since the previous RFP. It is not intended to provide all of the information needed to submit a successful application under the RFP. The RFP webpage located at hcr.ny.gov/multifamily contains the full RFP, required application components, and relevant guidance documents. This webinar is not intended to cover the process for accessing 4% tax credits and bond financing options. Also not covered by this webinar is the planned release of a separate RFP for project-based vouchers. More information will be provided regarding that RFP as soon as it becomes available. Lastly, this webinar is pre-recorded. There will not be an opportunity to pose questions. Questions regarding the RFP are accepted on a continuous basis via email at 9%RFP@nyshcr.org. Questions and answers on the RFP, as well as any updates, will be posted on a periodic basis on the webpage, so check back frequently to ensure access to the most current information. Our agenda for today includes a summary of what's new in this RFP, a general overview of the RFP as a whole, a description of program funds available, the funding round schedule including important dates, review of the application materials available on the website and the review process, the technical assistance requirement, a review of the state's housing goals, program information, underwriting guidance. We will also cover design unit guidance, as well as our Fair and Equitable Housing Office requirements, including the Affirmative Fair Housing Marketing Plan and Section 3 applicability. Finally, we will address minority and women-owned business enterprise and service-disabled veteran-owned business participation requirements. In terms of what's new in this RFP, we have endeavored to keep the changes to a minimum to better assist resubmissions from the summer RFP round. First, HCR has updated the design waiver process. All applicants requesting a waiver must utilize the updated design waiver request at the website provided. The form must be received at least 30 calendar days prior to the submission deadline. The governor's priority of making broadband accessible to all New Yorkers has become even more palpable and important since the beginning of the pandemic. HCR considers the provision of free Wi-Fi and affordable housing developments to be vital. Fall 2020 applicants are highly encouraged to include access to broadband services for all residents through methods such as discounted bulk internet services or managed Wi-Fi throughout the project. Projects which provide broadband internet connection in dwelling units and/or in common areas will be given priority consideration in the scoring process. This should be reflected in the project narrative, operating, and development budget. Fall 2020 projects located outside of New York City, which receive funds through the 9% multifamily RFP and are larger than 25,000 square feet will be subject to HCR benchmarking requirements. Fall 2020 projects located in New York City, subject to New York City Local Law 84, may be requested to share data with the HCR Portfolio Manager account. Additional information on benchmarking requirements are available through the benchmarking link indicated. Market study updates. For projects resubmitted from the summer 2020 round, if no changes have been made to the number of units, unit configuration, rent structure, and income targets, applicants may submit a letter from the market analyst certifying that the findings of the previous market study remain valid, in lieu of submitting a new study. If a resubmission of a summer 2020 application has changes to rents, income targets, number of units, and/or unit sizes, the analyst must provide an updated capture rate analysis reflecting the changes, along with a certification that all other information provided in the prior study remains valid. Sponsors must also resubmit a copy of the prior market study in the financing application. Fall 2020 projects are encouraged to include measures that advance the CLCPA goals. Applications which advance the CLCPA goals will be favorably reviewed. Applicants are encouraged to review clarifications that have been made to the Fall 2020 term sheets, including clarification on what constitutes new units under the SHOP program, clarification in the Housing Trust Fund and Low-Income Housing Tax Credit term sheets on the applicability of Middle-Income Housing Program, and inclusion of a narrative regarding access to services that support aging in place for the Senior Housing Program. As a general overview, what was formerly known as the Unified Funding Round is now referred to as the HCR Multifamily Finance 9% RFP. It is a competitive process used to award 9% low-income housing tax credit and subsidies financing to sponsors proposing to develop affordable and supportive housing projects that address a wide range of needs identified in the state's housing goals. The process to offer funding twice per year was initiated in the fall of 2019 and is intended to be more responsive to the timing of real estate development, offer a shorter feedback loop and more frequent opportunities, and improve the quality and readiness of applications selected so they continue to align with the state's housing goals. Competitive regions. Proposals that are complete and meet all threshold and eligibility requirements will be scored and ranked by geographic region. The state is divided into 10 regions that correspond to the Regional Economic Development Councils shown here. An important distinction to note in terms of regional scoring is that HCR will evaluate costs using two cost regions. First is the downstate region, which includes New York City, Westchester, Nassau, and Suffolk counties, and Rockland County has been added to the downstate cost region. The second will include all proposed projects located in the remaining counties of the state. HCR is making a variety of sources available in this funding round, including $22 million in 9% low-income housing tax credits, $2 million in New York State low-income housing tax credits, $25 million in low-income housing trust fund, $3 million in rural and urban community investment fund, $20 million in supportive housing opportunity program funds, $3 million in public housing preservation program, $3.5 million in middle income housing program, $5 million in Housing Development Fund, $2 million in Federal Housing Trust Fund, $5 million in Senior Housing Program, and $5 million in All Affordable New York City funds. Term sheets describing these resources in more detail are available on the HCR Multifamily RFP webpage and will be described in more detail later in the webinar. The timeline for the RFP is as follows. On November 17th, the RFP was released along with the Notice of Funding Availability and the Notice of Credit Availability. On December 1st, the webinar will be posted. December 1st is also the deadline to request a TA session and is also the due date for the Design Unit Occupied Rehabilitation Package and/or credit fee deferral. As a reminder, design waivers are due 30 days prior to the application deadline. December 22nd is the deadline to register, email, and users for Dropbox. On January 13th, 2021, at 11:59 p.m. is the application submission deadline. The following is a list of the application and reference materials located on the 9% Multifamily RFP webpage. First is the HCR Multifamily 9% RFP financing application and the HCR Multifamily 9% RFP underwriting application, which are two separate Excel workbooks that must be completed and submitted. Next, the technical assistance request form, the RFP itself and the term sheets, the 2020 HCR design guidelines, 2020 HCR design guidelines record of revisions, the energy efficiency, green building, visitability, accessibility submission requirements and scoring, the design waiver request form, the 9% low-income housing tax credit qualified allocation plan from 2013, the New York State low-income housing credit regulations, the capital programs manual, the 2019 New York State annual action plan. Also included are HCR's 9% multifamily reference materials list, HCR 9% multifamily NOFA and NOCA, State Historic Preservation Office walkthrough guidance and contact list, Federal Housing Trust Fund rehab standards, Housing Opportunity Census tracts, Market Analyst Certification Form, Pre-Qualified Market Analysts List, Affirmative Fair Housing Marketing Plan Guidance, HCR Multifamily Finance 9% Application Webinar, Home, Federal Housing Trust Fund, and CDBG Anti-Displacement and Relocation Assistance Plan, Home, FHTF, and CDBG Relocation Appeal Process, and Aspera Dropbox instructions. Overview of the application process. First, pre-application technical assistance with one of our development directors is mandatory. Darren will describe that in more detail. We've maintained the requirement that all proposed projects must meet at least one housing goal. To be considered and reviewed, each application must pass threshold and eligibility review. A component of threshold is completeness, that is, all required components must be included in the submission. Development team capacity and experience are also evaluated. The project must propose the minimum regulatory term for the applicable program or programs under which funding is being requested. Evidence of site control must be valid through the proposed construction closing financing date. Environmental site suitability must be met. Heather will describe that in further detail later in the webinar. In New York City, when the ULURP is required, ULURP certification must have been obtained and full ULURP approval must be achievable within 90 days of award. The need for the project must be demonstrated by a market study or analysis. Letter or letters of interest from private lenders or lenders must be included and dated no earlier than 45 days from the date of submission. Letters of interest or LOIs from government agencies are not required but preferred. HCR will consult with other government sources of financing during the review process. If low-income housing tax credits are proposed, an equity investor or syndicator letter must be provided, dated no earlier than 45 days prior to the submission deadline. Finally, all entries in the ownership structure must be identified. Proposals that meet all of these threshold requirements will be reviewed to determine whether program-specific eligibility requirements are met per the eligibility checklists in the application. Proposals that pass both threshold and program eligibility will be scored using the following scoring criteria outlined in the 9% Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Qualified Allocation Plan. The first of these is Community Impact and Revitalization, up to 15 points. Financial Leveraging, up to 13 points. Sponsor Characteristics, up to 10 points. Green Building per the criteria outlined in the Energy Efficiency, Green Building, Visitability, and Accessibility Submission Requirements, up to 5 points. Fully accessible and adaptable move-in ready units, up to 5 points. Affordability, up to 5 points. Individuals with children, up to 5 points. Marketing Plan Public Assistance, 5 points. Marketing Readiness, up to 5 points. Persons with Special Needs, up to 5 points. Participation of not-for-profit organizations, up to 4 points. Mixed income, up to 5 points. Historic nature of the project, up to 3 points. Cost effectiveness, 5 points. Housing opportunity projects, up to 3 points. Minority women-owned business enterprises and service-disabled veteran-owned business participation, up to 2 points. For the purposes of rating and ranking applications, when an applicant requests funds from 2 or more programs, HCR will utilize the scoring criteria for the program that would provide the greatest amount of financial assistance to the project. Funding awards are made from available funds on the basis of score and ranking, statutory distribution requirements, geographical distribution across the state, support of the state's housing goals, and other review criteria outlined in the RFP. Applicants will be informed of the disposition of their application via outcome letter. Any complete application which meets threshold and eligibility review criteria but is not selected for a reservation of low-income housing tax credits will be placed on a waiting list which will be in effect until next funding round, at which time the waiting list will be terminated. Submission requirements. There are 2 Excel workbooks that comprise a complete application. First is the financing application workbook, and the second is the underwriting model. Within the financing application workbook, tabs and forms have been renamed to exhibits and attachments with required submissions identified. Exhibits consist of fillable Excel worksheets. In some cases, there are associated PDF uploads, while attachments consist of PDF uploads. The Aspera Dropbox. Applications must be submitted electronically, which includes the completed Excel documents and PDF uploads via an Internet Aspera Dropbox set up by HCR. Prior to December 22nd at 3 p.m. Eastern, applicants must send an email to 9%RFP@nyshcr.org to request access to the Dropbox to be used for the submission of an application. Following a request for access, each user will receive a Dropbox invitation email from NYS MySend. The invitation email will contain a unique web link that has been assigned to them specifically, which is the equivalent of their user ID and password for the Dropbox. Users must install the Aspera software in order to submit an application. Applicants should review the Aspera Dropbox instructions available on the multifamily RFP webpage for more detailed information, including file size requirements, file naming conventions, etc. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Darren Scott.
Thanks, Brett. Greetings and welcome to the Fall 2020 9% round. I'm Darren Scott, Upstate East Development Director for New York State Homes and Community Renewal. Technical assistance. Pre-application technical assistance is mandatory. Requests for TA must be made using the TA request form. Send completed TA request forms to 9%RFP@nyshcr.org. Be specific regarding the issues you want to discuss during your TA session. At least 5 business days before scheduled TA session, applicants must submit Underwriting Model, B2 Project Narrative, D1 Preliminary Plans, including site plans, building plans, and building elevations, G1 Physical Needs Assessment for rehab projects only, G2 to G8 Occupied Project Information for occupied rehab projects only. See the RFP for additional requirements for occupied rehabilitation projects. This year, you'll see that we are back to having 3 development directors, and I want to personally welcome Ayanna Wayner onto the team. Ayanna will be taking back the downstate region to that portfolio, which includes Rockland and Westchester counties, New York City metro area, and Long Island. State housing goals. All projects are required to meet one or more of the following goals. Community renewal and revitalization projects. These are projects that meet a local need, which can be evidenced in a variety of ways. Integrated supportive housing projects. This is permanent supportive housing with service and operating subsidies. Public housing redevelopment projects. Housing opportunity projects. These are projects in census tracts with low poverty and high performing schools. Workforce opportunity projects. These are projects located within a half-mile safe walk of regular running public transit. Projects advancing state revitalization and economic development initiatives. These are DRI projects. These are projects endorsed by the Regional Economic Development Council, brownfield cleanup projects, and projects located in an area designated as an Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative, or ESPRI. Senior housing projects. These are senior projects that also meet one of 4 other housing goals, those being community renewal and revitalization, workforce opportunity, economic development, or downtown revitalization initiative. And finally, preservation projects. These are projects that are currently regulated with a preference for HCR projects. Going into the program information, 9% Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or LIHTC. This round, we will be utilizing the existing Qualified Allocation Plan effective date of November 20th, 2013, which can be found at the website on your screen. Projects must meet the 2020 HCR design guidelines. Note that there are no other options this round. For projects utilizing multiple sources of tax credit financing, such as LIHTC or the State Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, investor letters must separately quantify the value of each tax credit resource. HCR requires that investors and syndicators assign an independent value to each type of credit reflecting the actual market value of the resource being proposed for purchase. And sponsors may request middle-income housing program funds in conjunction with 9% low-income housing tax credits. 9% low-income housing tax credit set-asides. ESHI and supportive housing projects up to $4 million. ESHI projects must have received a conditional award notification through the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative Interagency Service and Operating Funding Opportunity RFP. At least 50% of the units must serve persons with special needs. Projects must meet the definition of supportive housing cited in Section 2040.2U of the 9% low-income housing tax credit QAP, provided, however, that applicants may satisfy the capital financing requirement of that definition by requesting SHOP funds pursuant to this RFP. And supportive housing projects, at least 50% of the units must serve persons with special needs cited in Section 2040.2Q of the 9% low-income housing tax credit QAP, and must meet the definition of supportive housing cited in 2040.2U of the 9% LIHTC QAP. Housing opportunity projects up to $4 million. Family projects which must be located in a hot census tract. You can find those in the reference materials. They must have an average unit size of at least 2 bedrooms. 10% of the units must be targeted to households at or below 30% of the median income. NYCHA Seniors First, up to $15 million multi-year. These projects must be targeted to seniors 62 years and older. Projects must be 100% affordable, and locations are restricted to Central Brooklyn with award of site control from NYCHA and HPD. And Vital Brooklyn for projects that address chronic social, economic, and health disparities in Central Brooklyn. Moving on to the New York State Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, or SLIC. SLIC may not be used to finance senior units serving households above 60% of the median income. Projects must meet the 2020 HCR design guidelines. A reminder, for projects utilizing multiple sources of tax credit financing, such as LIHTC and SLIC, investor letters must separately quantify the value of each tax credit resource. HCR requires that investors and syndicators assign an independent value to each type of credit reflecting the actual market value of the resource being proposed for purchase. Per project maximum of $500,000. SLIC may not be used in projects with LIHTC income averaging set aside. And SLIC can be combined with MIP for project units above 90% of the median income, up to 130% of the median income, as specified in the SLIC term sheet. Low-Income Housing Trust Fund, or HTF. Projects must benefit households at or below 90% of the area median income, or in New York City, at or below 80% of the area median income. Housing Trust Fund may not be used to finance senior units serving households above 60% of the median income. HTF may be combined with MIP for project units above 90% AMI up to 130% AMI upstate, or above 80% AMI up to 130% AMI downstate, as specified in the HTF term sheet. It may not be combined with senior, public housing, or SHOP capital subsidies. Projects must meet the 2020 HCR design guidelines. And I'd like to specifically emphasize that applicants requesting Housing Trust Fund must ensure use of the correct program name in the financing application and underwriting application. Supportive Housing Opportunity Program, or SHOP. a minimum of 30% of the project units must be designated for supportive housing. Please note, this is new for this round. For projects involving the relocation of existing supportive units funded by state rental and operating subsidies, the existing supportive housing units will be considered as new supportive housing units for the purpose of calculating the total number of supportive units in the proposed project. You must have an award of service and operating funds. Projects serving intellectually or developmentally disabled populations must include either an ESHI conditional award letter and does not require OPWDD capital or a current letter of support from OPWDD issued following the release date of this RFP. SHOP cannot be used with senior, HTF, or public housing funds. PBVs can be accessed to fund non-ESHI units in an ESHI project. In New York City, PBVs can be accessed for both ESHI and non-ESHI units. The ESHI service and operating award may not be used for rent subsidies, but only for services on ESHI units with PBVs. Continuing with SHOP. You may request middle-income housing program subsidies in conjunction with SHOP as specified in the SHOP term sheet. ESHI supportive units rents must be underwritten to at least 50% of the median income, but may be higher based upon the operating needs of the project. At least 50% of the units in the project must be affordable to households earning no more than 60% of the median income or 80% of the median income if income averaging is being used. And projects must meet the 2020 HCR design guidelines. Moving on to the Public Housing Preservation Program, or PHP. This program allows for the rehab and/or demolition and replacement through new construction of site-specific multifamily rental housing owned by federal public housing authorities. It may not be combined with senior, HTF, SHOP, or MIP funds. PHP requires a commitment to enter into a housing assistance payment or CHAP letter or other written permission from HUD. You may request PBVs if not in a RAD 1 program, and the project must meet the 2020 HCR design guidelines. Rural and Community Investment Fund, or SIF. This program is for non-residential uses only. SIF is available for new construction, adaptive reuse, or rehabilitation of a retail, commercial, or community facility component of an HCR regulated affordable housing development that clearly serves the critical unmet needs of the tenants in the affordable housing development, or clearly advances a regional economic development council or downtown revitalization initiative approved strategic investment plan. In order to be deemed a component of an HCR regulated affordable housing development, it must be part of or in close proximity to the affordable housing development. Federal Housing Trust Fund, or FHTF. Again, I'd like to emphasize, applicants requesting Federal Housing Trust Fund must ensure use of the correct program name in the financing application and underwriting application. Federal Housing Trust Fund may be used for new construction, adaptive reuse, or preservation. Financing is available for 30% AMI units within a mixed income project. Projects must meet the 2020 HCR design guidelines. See the Federal Housing Trust Fund term sheet for additional environmental review and prohibitions. See the reference materials and related resources for subsidy limits, rent limits, and rehab standards. Senior Housing Program. The purpose of the Senior Housing Program is to fund projects serving seniors 62 years and older. Projects must include healthy aging programming and design features to allow seniors to age in place in attachment B2 project narrative. Up to 60% of the median income or 80% of the median income if utilizing low-income housing tax credit income averaging set aside. Projects must meet the 2020 HCR design guidelines. And senior subsidy may not be combined with HTF, public housing, SHOP, or the middle income housing program. All Affordable New York City Program, or AA-NYC. For this program, there is no separate term sheet. Applicants cannot request this specific funding source. Instead, HCR will swap in All Affordable NYC funds at the agency's discretion for those projects which meet the following criteria. Projects located in New York City and include units up to 60% of the median income. Funds will be swapped in at the same per unit limits as the subsidy source requested. And finally, the Housing Development Fund Program, or HDF. Subject to appropriation, HDF program loan funds may be requested as low-interest construction financing to eligible not-for-profit applicants proposing 9% low-income housing tax credit, SLIC, Senior, Housing Trust Fund, SHOP, Public Housing, SIF, or MIP, proportional acquisition, hard cost, and soft costs as permanent financing. HDF may not be used to finance senior units serving households above 60% of the median income. Applicants considering HDF to bridge an HTF permanent loan should discuss with HCR staff prior to application submission. HDF loans may involve additional processing time due to additional state agency approvals, including the Office of the State Comptroller. This concludes my portion of the presentation. I will now turn it over to my colleague Lenny Skrill. Be well, good luck, and I look forward to seeing your applications.
Good morning. The Fall 2020 RFP Underwriting Application Model is available on HCR's website. Applications submitted in an incorrect or outdated form will not be considered for funding. The underwriting model has only minor revisions since the last version to make it more user-friendly, address minor formula issues, and update for the 2020 HUD AMIs. Please be consistent with program requests on the financing application and underwriting application. The amount of the program requests must be the same in both the financing application and the underwriting applications, as well as which programs are being requested. Setting rents for the fall 2020 projects. Rent affordability automatically calculates off the 2020 AMIs in the underwriting manual. The rent levels should be set at the lesser of the 2019 AMIs or 2020 AMIs for the project county. For example, in New York City, the 2020 AMIs increased, set rents based on 2019 AMIs. On Syracuse projects, 2020 AMIs decrease, set rents based on the 2020 AMIs. Market studies. Please refer to Section 5.0 of the Capital Programs Manual for specific market study and market analysis submission requirements. For low-income housing credit and/or state low-income housing credit projects in the City of New York, you can submit a market analysis in lieu of professional market study. For low-income housing credit or state low-income housing credit projects outside New York City, must submit a professional market study prepared by a firm on HCR's pre-qualified market analyst list. More stuff on market studies. This is our resubmissions of summer 2020 applications only. If there are no changes that have been made to the number of units, unit configuration, rent structure, and income targets, applications may submit a letter from the market analyst certifying that The findings of the previous market study remain valid in lieu of submitting a new study. If a resubmission of a summer 2020 application has changes to rent income targets, number of units, and/or unit size, the analyst must provide an updated capture rate analysis reflecting the changes, along with certification that all other information provided in the prior study remains valid. This is about reserves. In the first section, we're going to discuss is capitalized reserve contributions to the operating reserve. So projects with low-income housing credit or state low-income housing credit that are over 60 units, we expect reserves to be capitalized at 3 months of operating expenses and debt service. For projects less than 60 units, we want 6 months of operating expenses and debt service. For projects with just subsidy alone, there is no requirement to capitalize an operating reserve, but may be considered if there are eligible project sources to cover such cost. Capitalized reserve contributions replacement reserved. So we require initial capitalization equal to $1,000 per unit for all preservation rehab projects, including low-income housing credit and/or state low-income housing credit as a financing source. We don't require initial capitalization for all other projects financed with low-income housing tax credit or state low-income housing credit, or for projects which do not include low-income housing credit or state low-income housing credit as a source. Annual reserve contributions to the operating reserve. Projects with low-income housing tax credit or state low-income housing credit, there are no annual operating reserve contributions required. For projects with subsidy alone, we require 3% of gross rents annually required in any year that the reserve balance is less than 50% of gross rents. The contribution should be trended to increase by 2% annually in the operating pro forma. Annual reserve contributions replacement reserve. So for projects with low-income housing tax credit or state low-income housing credit, our expectation is $250 per unit for all new construction projects, $300 per unit for all rehab projects, and contributions must be trended to increase 3% annually in the operating pro forma. For projects with subsidy alone, it's 0.5% of construction costs capped at $800 per unit for family projects and $400 per unit for senior projects. And these need to be trended annually at 3%. Just some more details about financing term. Essentially, all HCR's financing is available at permanent financing only in this RFP, with the exception of HGF, which is only available as a construction period financing. We require a 30-year term loan minimum up to 50 years maximum. The expectation is that it's going to be 0.5 interest only hard paid debt, with the federal exception of Federal Housing Trust Fund program loans, which will be 0% interest. HCR debt must be budgeted above the line in the operating pro forma, payable above all subordinate debt, including deferred fee loan. Refer to the underwriting model worksheets in Section 5 of the Capital Programs Manual for specific underwriting criteria. Underwriting technical assistance prior to application submission is available on a limited basis where warranted. Example, new applicants, complex financing proposals, etc. Use the full 2020 9% underwriting application Excel worksheet when submitting exhibits for the underwriting technical assistance. Follow the technical assistance procedures laid out in the RFP. I am now going to hand off this conversation to my colleague, Christy Witcher from A&E, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Lenny. I will be reviewing some of the notable design unit changes that have occurred in the Fall 2020 RFP. First and foremost, the 2020 HCR Design Guidelines is fully applicable to all projects funded under the Fall 2020 Multifamily Finance 9% RFP. The HCR Design Guidelines takes the place of the HTFC Design Handbook and was developed as a universal design standard that applies to multiple funding sources available through HCR. Any project seeking funding through the Fall 2020 Multifamily Finance 9% RFP, regardless of the funding source, will be required to comply with the HCR design guidelines. There have been small updates to the July 2020 version released this summer, which have been outlined in an addendum document. The current version of the design guidelines, as well as a list of the revisions in the addendum, have been posted on the HCR website under the RFP reference documents. Should there be any need to request a waiver from any of the criteria required in the design guidelines, HCR has a design waiver process for applicants to obtain a waiver from a specific requirement prior to the application submission. In order to expedite the design waiver process, as well as open this process up to other funding avenues available through HCR, we are implementing a new design waiver process. Any reasonable need to waive the requirements of the HCR design guidelines can be requested via Design Waiver Request Form. The form is available in Word format and should be returned in PDF format to either Ralph Torca for downstate projects or Christy Witcher for upstate projects. The breakdown of upstate versus downstate regions was highlighted earlier in this presentation, but for those of you who aren't familiar with the breakout, the upstate regions include any projects north of Westchester and Rockland County. The design waiver request form is available online in the RFP reference materials. There have been a few small changes to the design submissions in the application file. In Exhibit D3, Outline Specifications, there have been minor updates to coordinate the outline specifications with the 2020 HCR design guidelines. The most notable change is that there is a selection for superior PEX installation. While some of the previous requirements for PEX installation are not a requirement under the 2020 design guidelines, projects have the option to utilize what is referred to as a superior installation. If a project is planning to utilize PEX, choosing this option for superior installation, as defined in the 2020 design guidelines, will render a more favorable review in the design unit's application assessment, as more durable features are preferred in projects. Also, in Exhibit D7, the criteria for visitability has been updated to clarify that while 3-foot path into and through a dwelling unit is preferred, meeting accessible route criteria is also acceptable. Please note, due to the current status of the COVID pandemic, pre-application site visits for moderate rehabilitation projects will be conducted via remote procedures. A memo outlining the procedure for this remote site visit is posted under the RFP reference materials. I'd like to provide a review and also touch on some of the notable changes that have occurred with some of the energy efficiency strategies and green building programs that may be utilized by projects. As I mentioned in the previous webinar, the Multifamily New Construction Program is the current program in effect through EPA Energy Star for all multifamily residential projects. Earlier this year, EPA Energy Star extended the date for utilization of its older program to July 2021. Applicants may utilize either program within the timeframes permitted by EPA Energy Star. Additionally, the NYSERDA New Construction Housing Program has not yet been released by NYSERDA. However, we do believe that it will be released soon. Projects that have applied under the Low-Rise New Construction Program or the Multifamily New Construction Program will have the opportunity to utilize the new program under an equivalent tier based on the guidance set forth by NYSERDA for switching to the new program. Please remember that all of the dates that pertain to the utilization of a particular program, whether it be NYSERDA or EPA Energy Star, are based on the date of the application to the program or the permit date, not the HCR application date. So please reference the respective program websites for current information. Under the optional green building programs of the RFP, please note that projects no longer have the option of choosing the 2015 Enterprise Green Communities criteria, as that program expired in October. Under the 2020 Enterprise Green Communities criteria, projects have the option to achieve the Enterprise Green Communities Plus certification through significant energy efficiency achievements. This compliance option is now available under the RFP for 5 points. Finally, HCR is committed to supporting and advancing the goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, otherwise known as the CLCPA. Projects are encouraged to include green and energy efficiency measures that advance the CLCPA goals. Applications which advance these goals will be favorably reviewed. Now, I'd like to pass this over to the Director of DC&E's Environmental Unit, Heather Spitzberg.
I'm Heather Spitzberg, the Director of HCR's Environmental Unit. Environmental site suitability is the threshold item that must be addressed in Attachment E of your application. The burden is on the applicant to demonstrate acceptability. Environmental staff cannot fill in gaps if information is omitted or not analyzed. There are two elements to the site suitability analysis: site contamination and surrounding use suitability. For the site contamination section, please read the Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment for your site. If any concerns are revealed, the application must specifically explain how those concerns will be resolved and paid for, and the timeline for resolution in Section E3 of your application. For the surrounding use suitability reviews, we suggest that applicants copy the instructions from E6 into a document and respond to each request. For determining the search radius for a single site, use the center of the area of your site that will be developed. Unused portions of land are not included in this. Scattered site applications must analyze every site. Recognizing that may be overly burdensome, the search radius may be measured from the center of a group of properties. However, as each site must be analyzed, this may require more than one search radii if not all the sites can be captured in one radius. Consult environmental staff if you need assistance determining a search radius. For each identified use, provide the narrative indicated in B1 and 2. For any closed facilities or permits, the application can note that there are closed facilities without providing a specific list. Any active storage tank facilities should take into consideration the use of the facility and whether it presents suitability concerns beyond the presence of a storage tank. Phase 1 environmental site assessment is not sufficient for the site suitability analysis. Now Ayana will speak to FEHO, MWBE, and wrap up the webinar.
HCR's Fair and Equitable Housing Office, FEHO, ensures that the agency and our awardees comply with the Fair Housing Act, the New York State Human Rights Law, and any applicable local fair housing laws, policies, and procedures. No rubber stamp. FEHO attorneys review each plan for compliance with HCR guidelines and fair housing laws. Questions regarding the marketing plans and fair housing? Please go to the following website, https://hcr.ny.gov/marketing-plans-policies, or email FEHO, that's FEHO, at nyshcr.org. Each development must create and execute. Number 1, FEHO short form, submitted prior to closing, and includes any occupancy preferences and fair housing claims or litigation. All occupancy preferences must be approved by FEHO, even those projects which received QAP scoring points for marketing plan, public assistance, or persons with special needs. FEHO review also includes any local and workforce preferences. Number 2, the FEHO long-form Affirmative Fair Housing Marketing Plan, otherwise known as AFHMP, submitted prior to the commencement of marketing. Submit the completed form 240 days or 8 months before occupancy. The marketing and application period must be 60 days after FEHO approval. Special areas of interest in the FEHO review. Outreach and marketing. The plan must demonstrate a meaningful plan to reach those least likely to apply in the area. Occupancy preferences. FEHO conducts an individualized analysis of each preference requested. You must provide demographics and supporting documentation to ensure the preference is not disparately impacting protected groups. VAWA. You cannot deny or terminate a tenant based on adverse factors like poor credit or rental history, directly related to the VAWA-covered crime. Justice Involvement Assessment Policy. This is very limited automatic bar based on criminal background. A housing provider must conduct individualized assessment in order to deny. You must use the HCR worksheet. Credit Policy. There's no automatic bar based on credit. Housing provider must conduct individualized assessment and allow evidence of 12 months on-time rent payment instead of pulling credit report. You must use the HCR worksheet. Recipients of HUD funding, such as CDBG, Home, Federal HTF, and Section 8 project-based vouchers, in excess of $200,000 must comply with Section 3 of the Federal Housing and Community Development Act of 1968, which requires, to the greatest extent feasible, that employment, training, and contracting opportunities be given to low-income people in the area of the project and those companies that are hired or owned by them. Your contractor and subcontractors that receive a contract in excess of $100,000 are also required to comply with Section 3. You are responsible for reporting their Section 3 compliance metrics. Biannual reporting cycle. Report on whether you and your subs have met their Section 3 goals or provide justification and documentation for why not. If you have questions or need technical assistance, please email FEHO@nyshcr.org or see the website https://hcr.ny.gov/section-3-compliance. What are Section 3 minimum goals? At least 30% of all new employees hired should be Section 3 residents, such as local public housing authority and Section 8 residents count as Section 3 residents. And at least 10% of the total dollar amount of all Section 3 covered contracts for housing rehabilitation, construction, and other public construction should be granted to eligible Section 3 businesses. And at least 3% of the total dollar amount of non-construction, for example, professional services, contracts should be granted to eligible Section 3 businesses. MWBE Participation. Article 15A of the Executive Law promotes economic opportunities and equality of employment for minority group members and women in state contracting activities. All state-funded programs are subject to this law and must comply with HCR's MWBE participation requirements. HCR fully supports these efforts, and its Office of Equal Opportunity and Partnership Development, otherwise known as OEOPD, is charged with analyzing agency expenditures, creating procurement strategies, tracking, monitoring, and reporting progress, as well as identifying obstacles to help reach and/or exceed the 30% utilization rate. Preference and awards are given to applications which include New York State certified MWBE as part of the development team. Award decisions include consideration of the applicant's past and current performance, including MWBE performance. The Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Business Program, otherwise known as SDVOB, was signed into law by Governor Cuomo on May 12, 2014. The law allows eligible veteran business owners to get certified as a New York State Service-Disabled Veteran-Owned Business. OGS is the state agency responsible for administration of the program. All state-funded programs are subject to this law and must comply with all HCR SDVOB participation requirements. HCR's OEOPD is charged with monitoring compliance for its SDVOB program. HCR's statewide requirement for the SDVOB program is 6%. Please direct all questions to the email econ, that's ECON, .opportunity@nyshcr.org. Labor standards, Davis-Bacon, and prevailing wages. OEOPD is also charged with monitoring and compliance of all labor standard issues. Please direct all questions to laborstandardscompliance@nyshcr.org. Finally, questions may be asked only through email submission to 9%RFP@nyshcr.org. Questions and answers will be posted and updated periodically. Please check the website daily. Don't wait until the last minute to begin the application. Continue to check www.hcr.ny.gov/multifamily. Any updates to documents will be posted in the record of revisions. Good luck! Again, for questions and answers, please email 9%RFP@nyshcr.org. That's the number 9, the %, RFP@nyshcr.org. You can also see the website at www.hcr.ny.gov. Thank you.